Get off my bench, old man. Byron Ingram didn't look up right away. He was wrapping a pair of hand wraps around his left wrist. 2 loops around the base, 3 across the knuckles pulled tight between each finger. The same way his trainer Curtis Holloway had taught him 50 years ago in a basement gym in Philadelphia. The elastic had given out on these wraps years ago, but his hand still remembered the pattern. Muscle doesn't forget. I'm just sitting here, son, Byron said. His voice was low. The kind of low that comes from a man who learned a long time ago that volume doesn't win anything. Patience does. Don't call me son. The hand that grabbed his collar came fast. Young. Strong. The kind of grip that belongs to someone who has never had his grip tested by anything that pushed back. Brad Sawyer yanked Byron forward. The old man's canvas bag tipped over. 2 pairs of boxing gloves, a jump rope, and a roll of hand wraps spilled across the cracked concrete under the oak tree. Who the hell are you to think you're my father? One-eyed old rat. Brad slapped him. Not hard enough to draw blood, but hard enough to make a sound. The kind of slap designed for an audience. And he had one, for friends standing behind him, 2 with phones already raised, 1 with a speaker still blasting music loud enough to rattle the chain-link fence around the basketball courts. Let go of my shirt, please. Brad slapped him again. Harder this time. Byron's dark glasses went crooked on his face. He didn't reach for them. Didn't flinch. Just sat there on the bench. His bench, the one he'd sat on every morning for 3 years, and looked at the boy with his one good eye. The right eye saw nothing. Hadn't since 1984. A detached retina from a punch that should never have been thrown in a fight that should never have happened. But that was a long time ago. Most people on Oakfield Road didn't know about that. When they asked, Byron told them glaucoma. Easier that way. Brad released him. Turned to his friends. Teach him a lesson. This stinking old man dares to talk back to me. They closed in. 5 of them. Early 20s. Gym bags slung over their shoulders like props. The kind of boys who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. Byron stood up slowly. Every joint protested. His knees popped. His lower back tightened the way it did every morning before his first cup of coffee caught up with him. He was 74 years old. He moved like a man who'd spent a lifetime in his body and had the receipts to prove it. He looked at Brad. You sure about that, son? Brad laughed. His friends laughed. The phone cameras kept rolling. Brad had no idea who the man he had just attacked really was. Byron Ingram had lived on Oakfield Road for 41 years. Same house. Same porch. Same cracked front steps he never got around to fixing because Helen always said the cracks gave the house character. And Helen was the kind of woman whose word was final about things like that. The neighborhood had changed around him. New fences went up where old ones rotted. New faces moved in behind them. New money crept in from the east side, the way money always does, slow at first, then all at once like water finding a crack in a foundation. The corner store where Byron used to buy his morning paper became a coffee shop that charged $7 for a latte. The barber shop on the corner became a yoga studio. The kids who used to play stickball in the street grew up and moved away, and the kids who replaced them went to private schools and had tutors. But Byron stayed. He stayed because this was where Helen had planted her roses along the front walk. Deep red. The kind that bloom in April and hold on through June if you water them right. Helen had been gone 9 years now. Pancreatic cancer, fast and mean the way that kind always is. But the roses still bloomed every spring. Byron watered them every morning before he left for the park. It was less about gardening and more about the ritual of it. The 10 quiet minutes with his hands in the dirt, talking to a woman who couldn't talk back but somehow still heard everything. He was 74. Moved slow in the mornings. His left eye saw the world just fine. Sharp enough to read the fine print on a medicine bottle without his reading glasses if the light was good. His right eye saw nothing at all. Just a gray blur where the world used to be. A permanent fog that never lifted, never shifted, never gave him even a moment of hope that it might come back. He didn't talk about it. Not really. Not even with Helen when she was alive. She knew the broad strokes, that it happened in a fight, that it ended his career, that it was the reason he kept a shoebox under the bed that he never opened and she never asked about. That was enough for her. Helen was the kind of woman who understood that some wounds heal better when you don't pick at the scab. Most people on Oakfield Road knew Byron as the quiet old man who swept the sidewalk at 6 a.m. and carried grocery bags for Mrs. Patterson on Tuesdays. The man who nodded at you if you nodded first but never started a conversation. The man who sat on his porch in the evenings with a glass of iced tea and watched the neighborhood go by like a river he'd stopped trying to swim against. They didn't know about the 23 professional fights. They didn't know about the middleweight belt in that shoebox under the bed, wrapped in Helen's old scarf, the blue silk one she wore to their wedding reception. They didn't know that the name The Ghost once made grown men cross to the other side of the gym. That promoters in Philadelphia and Atlantic City used to argue about who got to put Byron Ingram on their fight card because he sold tickets without saying a word. 23 fights, 23 wins, 15 knockouts, 0 losses. Byron didn't talk about it. When people asked about his eye, he told them glaucoma. When people asked about his hands, the scar tissue across his knuckles, the way his fingers didn't quite straighten all the way, he told them arthritis. Easier that way. Every morning at 7 a.m., rain or shine, Byron walked 4 blocks to Brandon Park. He carried a canvas bag that had been with him longer than most of his furniture. Inside, 2 pairs of boxing gloves, one red, one black, both cracked and worn thin at the palms, a jump rope with wooden handles smooth from years of use, and hand wraps so old the elastic had given up pretending to be elastic. He set up near the basketball courts, under the oak tree where the roots had cracked the concrete into something that almost looked like a ring if you squinted and used your imagination. A cracked square of city concrete that Byron Ingram had turned into the most important place in the world for a handful of kids who had nowhere else to go. The kids started showing up 3 years ago. First Deshaun, 12 and angry at everything. His father had left when he was 7 and his mother worked double shifts at the Amazon warehouse. He came to the park because the park was better than the apartment, and Byron let him hit the heavy bag until the anger ran out of his arms. It never fully ran out, but it got quieter. Manageable. Like turning down the volume on a television you can't turn off. Then Kesha, 10 and faster than any of them. She could slip a jab before most kids her age could throw one. Her father coached her from the sidelines sometimes, shouting instructions that were half right and half nonsense, but Kesha didn't mind. She just smiled and kept moving. Then Caleb. Caleb was the one who kept Byron coming back. 10 years old. Small for his age. So small that the gloves Byron gave him hung off his hands like oven mitts. A stutter that turned simple words into obstacle courses. Good morning came out good morning on bad days and good morning on good ones. And Byron learned early on to wait for the good ones without making the boy feel like he was waiting. Caleb's father had been in prison since Caleb was 4. Armed robbery. 15 years. 7 left to go. Caleb didn't talk about him much. Byron didn't ask. His grandmother, Miss Denise, brought him to the park every morning before her shift at the hospital. She worked the housekeeping crew on the 4th floor. Oncology. She cleaned the rooms of people who were dying and then went home to raise a boy who was trying to figure out how to live. She couldn't afford a babysitter. She couldn't afford much of anything. But she could afford to walk Caleb to the park at 6:45 and pick him up at 9, and that was enough. The first day, Caleb watched from behind the water fountain. The second day he stood closer, near the edge of the cracked concrete, hands in his pockets, watching Deshaun work the heavy bag in Kesha's shadow box in the corner. The third day Byron held out a pair of gloves. You want to try? Caleb shook his head. Fast. The way you shake your head when you want to say yes but your body won't let you. That's okay, Byron said. He set the gloves on the bench. They'll be here tomorrow. That was all. No pressure. No pep talk. No come on you can do it. Just a pair of gloves sitting on a bench and a quiet old man who didn't make the boy feel small for being afraid. Took 2 weeks. One morning Caleb walked up to the bench, picked up the gloves, put his hands out and let Byron wrap them. His fingers were shaking. Byron pretended not to notice. First thing, Byron said. His voice the same calm it always was. Never loud, never rushed, never making anything feel bigger or smaller than it was. Plant your feet like this. He showed Caleb the stance. Left foot forward, right foot back. Weight balance between them, not too far forward, not too far back. The same stance Curtis Holloway had drilled into him 50 years ago in a basement gym in North Philadelphia that smelled like sweat and wintergreen oil. Now hands up. Protect what matters. Caleb raised his fists. They barely reached his own chin. The gloves swallowed his hands whole. He looked ridiculous and he knew it, and his lips started to tremble the way it did when the stutter was about to win. Good, Byron said. Real good. Caleb smiled. His grandmother told Byron later that it was the first time she'd seen that smile in months. Not the polite smile he gave teachers and doctors and adults who asked him questions he couldn't answer fast enough. The real one. The one that started behind his eyes and worked its way down to his mouth like sunrise. Every morning after that, Caleb was there. 6 days a week. He learned the jab first. Then the cross. Then how to slip a punch by moving his head 2 inches to the left. No more, no less. Byron taught the way Curtis had taught him, patient, quiet, one thing at a time. He never raised his voice. Never pushed too hard. When Caleb got frustrated and threw the gloves down, which happened because Caleb was 10 and the world had already given him more reasons to be frustrated than any 10-year-old should carry, Byron picked the gloves up, set them on the bench, and said the same thing every time. They'll be here tomorrow. Caleb always came back. What Byron was really teaching wasn't boxing. It was the thing underneath. The belief that your body could do what your mind was afraid of. That you could stand in front of something terrifying. A punch, a crowd, a word you couldn't get past your lips, and not run. That the stutter, the small frame, the missing father, the grandmother who cleaned hospital rooms for a living. None of it decided who Caleb was. The gloves just made it easier to believe. Research from the University of Chicago found something that Byron Ingram had been proving every morning for 3 years without knowing it. Structured physical activity, especially martial arts and boxing, reduces anxiety and improves speech fluency in children with stuttering by up to 40%. The researchers found that it wasn't the punching that made the difference. It was the rhythm, the breathing, the repetitive, predictable patterns that gave the brain a framework to work inside. The belief, built one jab at a time, that your body could do hard things even when your mind said you couldn't. Byron didn't know about that study. He didn't need to. He knew what Curtis Holloway had told him in that basement gym in Philadelphia when Byron was 22 and scared of everything except the sound of the bell. Plant your feet. Hands up. Protect what matters. The rest takes care of itself. 50 years later, Byron was saying the same words to a 10-year-old boy with a stutter and gloves too big for his hands. And the rest was taking care of itself. One morning at a time. If someone believed in you when nobody else did, type their name in the comments right now. Byron was that person for Caleb. Curtis was that person for Byron. Who was that person for you? Because this story is about to get dark. A boy named Brad Sawyer is about to walk into Brandon Park and try to destroy everything Byron built under that oak tree. And what Byron does in response will be seen by 40 million people. But first, you need to understand what Brad didn't know. About the man he was about to attack. About the hands that had been still for 30 years. About the ghost that was sleeping in a garage on Oakfield Road, waiting for a reason to wake up. Brad Sawyer rolled into Brandon Park on a Tuesday morning in late September like he owned the concrete. He was 22 years old. Tall in the way that young men are tall when they've never had to use their height for anything real. All reach, no foundation. Hair styled in the careful mess that takes 30 minutes to look effortless. White sneakers that had never touched anything dirtier than a sidewalk. A chain around his neck that cost more than Byron's car. He came with 4 friends. 2 had gym bags slung over their shoulders like props, the kind of guys who carry gym bags to look like they went to the gym, not because they actually did. 1 carried a Bluetooth speaker blasting a trap beat loud enough to rattle the chain-link fence around the basketball courts. Brad was the son of Councilman Garrett Sawyer. 3 terms on the city council. Chair of the Public Safety Committee. A name that opened doors, closed complaints, and made police reports disappear into filing cabinets where nobody would ever read them. Brad had never worked a job. Never needed to. His father's name was a credit card with no limit and no bill. He spent most of his time making content for his TikTok account. 200,000 followers, mostly teenagers who thought cruelty was comedy if you added the right music and the right caption. Pranks, he called them. The kind that targeted people who couldn't fight back. Homeless men sleeping on benches. Old women waiting at bus stops. Anyone who looked like they wouldn't chase you if you ran. He called it comedy. His followers agreed. The algorithm rewarded it. And Brad Sawyer had learned the way all bullies eventually learn, that the world doesn't punish you for what you do to people who don't matter. It rewards you. That morning, Byron was teaching Caleb how to keep his guard up after throwing a jab. Bring it back fast, Byron said, demonstrating the motion with his own hands, slow, deliberate, the way you show a child something that needs to live in their muscles, not just their head. The punch that hurts you is the one you don't see. Caleb nodded, threw the jab, pulled it back, getting better every week. His hands still shook a little, but less than they used to. His feet were starting to find the concrete the way roots find soil, uncertain at first, then sure. Brad spotted them from across the park. An old black man in dark glasses teaching a skinny kid to box with taped-up gloves on cracked concrete. Yo, get this, Brad said to his friend with the phone. This is gold. They walked over. Brad kicked the canvas back. It tipped and everything spilled across the ground: gloves, hand wraps, jump rope, the small roll of athletic tape Byron kept for Caleb's knuckles. What is this? A homeless gym. His friends laughed. The kind of laugh that doesn't come from something being funny. Comes from something being easy. The phone was already recording. Byron didn't look up. He put his hand on Caleb's shoulder, the same gentle placement he always used, the one that said, I'm here, you're safe, don't let them inside your head. Pick up your gloves, son. Hey, I'm talking to you. Brad stepped between them, close enough that Byron could smell his cologne, something expensive that tried too hard. You got a permit for this? You can't just set up camp in a public park. Byron looked at Brad with his one good eye. Calm. Measured. The way a man looks at something he's seen 100 times before in 100 different faces. We're just training, Byron said quietly. Training. Brad grinned at the camera. Training for what? The retirement home Olympics. More laughter. Caleb's hands were shaking. Not from the cold. Byron picked up the canvas bag, packed the gloves one by one, took Caleb's hand. Come on. We'll come back tomorrow. They walked away. Brad's laughter followed them all the way to the sidewalk. Byron came back the next morning. So did Brad. The second time, Brad brought a water bottle. Not to drink. He waited until Byron was showing Caleb how to pivot on the back foot, the weight transfer, the hip rotation, the small adjustment that turns a flat-footed stance into something that can move. Byron had his back turned, one hand on Caleb's shoulder guiding the motion, when he felt the water hit. Cold. Sudden. The entire bottle poured over his head in one long stream. Water ran down Byron's face, dripped off his chin, soaked through the collar of his canvas jacket. His dark glasses fogged up instantly, the world turning into a smear of gray and green. He stood still. Brad's friend screamed with laughter. 2 phones out now. One of them yelled, baptized him. Like it was the funniest thing he'd ever said in his life. You're still here, Brad said, tossing the empty bottle onto the grass. I thought I told you to crawl home. Byron wiped his face with his sleeve, took off his glasses, cleaned them on his shirt, put them back on. The world came back into focus, blurry at the edges where the right eye didn't work, sharp on the left where it still did. Caleb, he said quietly, show me that pivot again. Caleb was frozen, eyes wide, lips pressed together so tight the stutter wouldn't escape. His fists were clenched at his sides, knuckles white inside the oversized gloves. It's okay, Byron said. The same voice, the same calm, as if nothing had happened, as if water wasn't dripping from his eyebrows. Show me. Caleb pivoted. His feet were perfect. His hands were trembling. But he did it. Brad watched them for another 10 minutes, then got bored and left. But he posted the video that night. Caption: Old blind man gets baptized in the park. 14,000 likes by morning. 300 comments. Most of them laughing. Some of them worse than laughing. He came back Thursday. This time he went straight for the canvas bag. Byron had just finished wrapping Caleb's hands. 2 loops around the wrist, 3 across the knuckles, pulled tight between each finger. When Brad grabbed the bag and pulled out the gloves. The old ones. Cracked leather the color of burnt coffee. Laces frayed thin at the ends, held together in places by knots Byron had tied years ago, and never replaced because Helen had tied some of those knots. The ones from 1979, when Byron won his first professional fight and came home at 2 a.m. and Helen was waiting on the porch with those gloves polished and sitting on the railing like a trophy. She'd kept them polished every week for 26 years. Even after he stopped fighting. Even after the eye. She rubbed leather conditioner into the cracks the way some people pray, quietly with her hands, believing in something she couldn't explain. Brad held them up to the camera. Look at these museum pieces. He tossed one to his friend. They played catch across the basketball court, laughing every time Byron took a step toward them and they pulled the glove back. Give those back, Byron said. His voice was even but his jaw was tight. The kind of tight that comes from holding something back. Or what? Brad dangled the glove over a trash can. The metal rim caught the morning light. You want it? Come get it, old man. Byron didn't move. Brad dropped the glove in the trash. Then the other one. There, Brad said. Now you match the rest of the garbage out here. Byron said nothing. He turned to Caleb. Let's call it a day. That night at 10 p.m., under a streetlight that flickered every few seconds, Byron fished the gloves out of the trash. He sat on his porch and cleaned them with a damp cloth for an hour. Rubbed the leather the way Helen used to, small circles gentle, working the conditioner into every crack. His hands were steady. His breathing was not. He didn't cry. He hadn't cried since Helen's funeral, and he wasn't about to start over a pair of gloves. But something inside him tightened. Something that had been quiet for a very long time. He set the gloves on the railing where Helen used to keep them. Sat in the dark. Listened to the neighborhood settle into sleep around him. And he thought about a promise he'd made to a woman who was no longer here to hold him to it. The following Monday, Brad brought spray paint. Byron arrived at 7 as usual. Caleb was already waiting by the bench. Their bench under the oak tree. But something was different. Caleb was standing next to it, not sitting. Byron walked closer. Someone had sprayed the word blind across the seat in white paint. Below it, smaller, in shaking letters that suggested the artist had been hurrying. Go home. Caleb looked up at Byron. Mr. Byron, who did this? The stutter was back. Full force. 3 months of progress. 3 months of mornings where Caleb could say good morning, without tripping over the first syllable, gone in 2 words. Byron didn't answer. He set down his bag. Sat on the bench anyway. Right on top of the paint. The wet white letters pressed against his jeans. Come on, he said. Let's work on your cross today. But Brad wasn't done. From Brad's perspective, this was the best content he'd ever made. The baptism video had outperformed everything on his page. His followers wanted more. Comments said things like, do it again and make the old man cry, and next time take his glasses. Brad's friend suggested they find someone else to mess with. Brad refused. He liked Byron specifically because Byron never reacted. The non-reaction was the content. The silence was the joke. Every time Byron wiped his face and said, Caleb, show me that pivot again, the comments section exploded. People couldn't believe the old man wouldn't fight back. They called him pathetic. They called him weak. They called him everything Brad wanted them to call him. Brad also knew something the rest of the park didn't. His father was Councilman Garrett Sawyer. Every cop in the precinct knew the name. 2 complaints had already been filed about Brad's behavior in Brandon Park. One from Mrs. Patterson, one from a jogger who'd seen the water bottle incident. Both had been quietly moved to the bottom of the pile. One had disappeared entirely. Brad could do whatever he wanted. And he knew it. A 2020 study from the Journal of Social Psychology found something that explains why nobody stopped Brad. Researchers call it the power shield effect. Bystanders are 80% less likely to intervene when the aggressor appears to have social or institutional power. It's not that people don't care. It's that they do the math. And the math always favors the person with connections. Mrs. Patterson watched from her window every morning. She saw the water. She saw the gloves in the trash. She saw the spray paint. She picked up the phone twice to call the precinct. Both times she put it down. What's the point? She told her daughter. His daddy runs the whole thing. Deshaun's mother pulled him from the group after the baptism video went viral. "I can't have my son around that," she said. She didn't mean Byron. She meant the danger that Byron attracted by refusing to leave. Kesha's father did the same. "Find somewhere else to play," he told her. Kesha cried for 2 days. Within a week, only Caleb was left. His grandmother didn't have the option of finding somewhere else. She worked from 6 to 4. The park was it. There was no backup plan. There was no plan B. There was just Byron Ingram and an oak tree and a cracked concrete ring that the rest of the world had decided wasn't worth defending. Every morning Byron showed up. Every morning Caleb showed up. Every morning Brad showed up. And every night, Byron sat in his garage in the dark. The heavy bag hung from the ceiling beam. The same one he'd installed in 1986 when he still thought he might come back to the ring. When he still believed that one good eye was enough and that the world owed him a second chance. He hadn't touched it in 30 years. But now his hands found it in the dark. Left jab. Right cross. Left hook. The bag swung and he caught it. The chain rattled against the beam overhead. Dust fell from the ceiling in thin gray streams that caught the light from the street lamp outside. The rhythm came back like breathing. His right eye saw nothing. His hands remembered everything. He hit the bag for an hour. Then 2. Then 3. The combinations he hadn't thrown since the middleweight finals in Atlantic City started surfacing in his muscles like memories he'd buried alive. Jab, jab, cross, hook to the body, uppercut. His left hand snapped the jab the way it used to, straight down the center, no loop, no telegraph. His right cross carried weight that surprised him. His body was old, but his technique was ageless. It lived in a place that didn't know what year it was. He never told anyone. Not Caleb. Not Mrs. Patterson. Not the ghost of Helen, whose roses he watered every morning before walking to the park. Something in Byron Ingram was waking up. And it scared him more than Brad Sawyer ever could. Because he had made a promise. To Helen. On the night she died, holding her hand in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and regret, he had whispered, "I'm done fighting. I'll keep my hands down. For you." And he had. For 30 years. Every day. Every morning. Every time someone looked at him wrong or said something cruel or treated him like he was invisible. He'd kept his hands down. Because Helen had asked him to. Because Helen had seen something in him that the ring never did. The capacity to be gentle, to be patient, to be still. But Helen was gone. And a 10-year-old boy was showing up every morning with shaking hands and split lips and a stutter that got worse every time Brad Sawyer walked into that park. And Byron was starting to wonder whether the promise he'd made to a dying woman was the same promise he owed a living child. If you've ever mistaken someone's patience for weakness, hit that like button right now. Because Byron Ingram had been patient for 30 years. And what happens when a patient man finally runs out of patience is something Brad Sawyer is about to learn the hard way. But before that, you need to see what Brad did to Caleb. Because there's a line. And when Brad crosses it, Byron's hands are going to remember something they haven't done in 4 decades. It happened on a Friday, October 9th. The kind of morning where the air smells like wet leaves and the sky can't decide between gray and blue. Byron and Caleb were working on combinations. Caleb was getting good. Real good. His jab had started to snap. That clean, sharp sound that comes when the fist travels straight instead of looping. His cross came straight too. No more wild arcs that left his whole body exposed. When he moved, his feet stayed under him the way Byron had taught. Left foot forward. Right foot back. Weight balanced. The same stance Curtis Holloway had drilled into Byron 50 years ago. Now living in the muscles of a 10-year-old boy who used to be afraid of his own voice. "That's it," Byron said. "Now again. Faster." Caleb threw the combo. Jab. Cross. Pull back. Clean. Again. Jab. Cross. Pull back. Even cleaner. Byron almost smiled. 3 months of mornings and the kid was starting to look like a fighter. Not because he was big or strong, he was neither. Because he was precise. Because he listened. Because every morning he showed up and put his hands out and said nothing and let Byron wrap them. That was discipline. The kind that doesn't need an audience. The kind that builds in the quiet hours when nobody's watching and nobody's cheering. and the only person you're trying to be better than is who you were yesterday. That was the morning Brad Sawyer decided to make his masterpiece. He showed up at 8:15 with 5 friends instead of 4. New guy had a ring light clipped to his phone, professional setup, the kind that costs more than Byron's groceries for a month. Brad had announced on his TikTok the night before. Tomorrow we finish this. Live at Brandon Park. Don't miss it. 11,000 people were watching the stream when they walked through the gate. Brad crossed the basketball court and headed straight for the oak tree. His friends fanned out behind him like they'd rehearsed it. Phones up. Speaker blasting. The whole production. Byron saw him coming. He put his hand on Caleb's shoulder. Stay behind me. Well, well, Brad said loud enough for the stream. The blind museum is still open. He looked directly into the camera. You guys watching? Watch this. Brad reached down and snatched the gloves off Caleb's hands. Caleb stumbled backward. His wrapped hands suddenly bare and useless in the morning air. Give those back, Byron said. Shut up. Brad tossed the gloves to his friend. Then he turned to Caleb. And this is where the line was crossed. Not the water. Not the gloves in the trash. Not the spray paint. Those were cruelty. This was something else. You know what your problem is, kid? Brad bent down to Caleb's level. Close enough that the boy could see himself reflected in Brad's sunglasses. Small, shaking, alone. You got nobody. Your daddy's in jail. Your mama's gone. And your boxing coach can't even see straight. Caleb's lip trembled. The stutter swallowed everything he tried to say. You're nothing. Just like him. Leave the boy alone. Byron's voice was low. The kind of low that sounds like a warning if you know what to listen for. The kind of low that comes from a man who has spent 30 years keeping something locked in a garage and is starting to hear it rattle the door. Brad didn't know what to listen for. Or what? Brad straightened up. Looked at the camera. Grinned. Then he shoved Caleb. Not a small shove. Both hands. Full force. Into a 10-year-old's chest. Caleb flew backward. Hit the edge of the concrete where the tree roots had cracked it. Went down hard. His head bounced off the ground. A sound that was too loud for a body that small. Blood appeared on his forehead. A thin line at first. Then it ran down past his eyebrow and into his right eye. Caleb didn't cry. He just lay there looking up at Byron with one eye open and one eye full of blood. Like a mirror. The stream had 16,000 viewers now. Byron looked down at Caleb. At the blood. At the boy's hands still curled into fists even on the ground. Still in guard position. Still protecting what matters. Something shifted behind Byron's eyes. Not anger. Something older than anger. Something that had been sleeping in a garage for 30 years and was now fully, completely awake. He took off his dark glasses. Folded them. Set them on the bench. The morning light caught his face. The right eye clouded, unfocused, dead. The left eye sharp as broken glass. The face of a man who had made a promise to a dying woman and kept it for 30 years and was now, in this moment, understanding that some promises have expiration dates. He turned to Brad. You sure about that, son? The same words he'd said on the park bench. The same question. But the voice was different now. There was no trembling. No patience. No old man. Brad laughed. What are you going to do, Grandpa? Bleed on me. He threw a punch. A lazy wide right hand. The kind of punch someone throws when they've never been hit back. All arm. No foundation. No guard. No understanding of what happens when a fist meets something that knows how to move. Byron slipped it 2 inches to the left. No more, no less. The movement was so fast that Brad's fist hit nothing but air. His momentum carried him forward. Off balance. His eyes went wide the first time fear touched his face. The first time he understood, in some primal part of his brain that didn't need words, that he had made a catastrophic mistake. Punch 1. Byron's left jab landed before Brad could reset. Straight down the center. Clean. The sound was sharp, not a thud, a crack. The kind of sound that comes from a fist that has been thrown 10,000 times and knows exactly where it's going. Brad's head snapped back. His nose shifted half an inch to the right. Blood appeared instantly, running down his upper lip. Brad staggered. Put his hands up. Too late. Too high. The guard of someone who'd watched boxing on television but never felt it in his body. Punch 2. Byron's right cross came underneath. Into the solar plexus. Not the chest, the solar plexus, the cluster of nerves below the sternum that, when struck correctly, shuts down the diaphragm like someone pulling the plug on a machine. Every molecule of air left Brad's lungs in one sound. A wheeze. A gasp. The sound of a body that has forgotten how to breathe. Brad bent forward. His hands dropped. His knees started to buckle. Punch 3. Byron planted his back foot at exactly 45 degrees. The same angle Curtis Holloway had drilled into him in that basement gym in Philadelphia. He rotated his hips before his arm moved, power from the ground up through the legs, through the core into the fist. His right hand traveled from his waist, not his shoulder. An uppercut that rose like a question and landed like an answer. It connected under Brad's chin with the precision of a man who had thrown that exact punch 10,000 times. In the ring. In the garage. In his sleep. Brad Sawyer left the ground. Both feet. Just for a second, the kind of second that feels like an hour to the person experiencing it and like a frame of film to everyone watching. Then he hit the concrete. Face first. And didn't move. 3 punches. 5 seconds. 46 years of silence broken in 5 seconds. The park was quiet. 16,000 people on the stream were quiet. Brad's friends were quiet. The one with the ring light hadn't moved. The phone was still recording. The red light blinked like a tiny witness that didn't know how to look away. Byron stood over Brad. His hands were shaking now. Not from exhaustion. From the flood of something he had spent 30 years trying to bury. The adrenaline. The muscle memory. The ghost of a fighter who had been locked in a garage and was now standing in the morning light, blinking at a world it didn't recognize. He looked at his fists. Opened them. Closed them. Opened them again. The knuckles were red. The scar tissue across them, old, white, layered like tree rings, had split open slightly on the left hand. A thin line of blood. His blood this time. Then he turned around. Walked to Caleb. Knelt down. He pressed his palm against the cut on the boy's forehead. Gentle. The same hands that had just put a 22-year-old on the ground were now holding a 10-year-old's face like it was made of glass. You okay? Caleb nodded. His eyes were wide. But not afraid. Something else. Something that looked like awe. Mr. Byron, he whispered. The stutter was gone. Not hiding. Just gone. You can fight. Byron picked the boy up. Set him on the bench. Wrapped his forehead with the old hand wraps from the canvas bag. The same wraps Curtis Holloway had given him in 1974, now being used to stop the bleeding of a child who had just watched a ghost come back to life. Then he sat beside him and put his arm around his shoulders. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Across the park, Brad Sawyer was being helped to his feet by his friends. His nose was bleeding. His jaw hung slightly open on the left side. His eyes were unfocused the way eyes get when the brain is still trying to figure out what just happened. The ring light was still on. The stream had been recording the entire time. 22 minutes of footage. The clip of the 3 punches was extracted within the hour. By noon it had 4 million views. By the next morning 40 million. The comments came in waves. Who is this old man? That footwork. That's not a street fighter. Somebody ID this guy. That uppercut was textbook. Who taught him that? The hashtag started small. #ParkKnockout. But by evening it had been replaced by something else. Something that would change everything. #BlindChampion. Neuroscientists call it procedural memory. The type of memory stored in your muscles and motor cortex, not your conscious brain. It's the reason you never forget how to ride a bike. The reason a pianist's fingers find the keys in the dark. The reason a fighter's body remembers combinations that his mind hasn't consciously rehearsed in decades. Byron Ingram's conscious brain hadn't thrown that uppercut since the middleweight finals in Atlantic City in 1984. His body had never stopped throwing it. Every night in the garage. Every morning on the porch. Every time he wrapped Caleb's hands and demonstrated the stance. The technique was alive in his muscles, waiting. Patient. Like a letter sealed and stamped. Just waiting for someone to drop it in the mailbox. Brad Sawyer had been the mailbox. Councilman Garrett Sawyer saw the video at 9 a.m. on Saturday morning. His chief of staff sent it with one line. "This is your son." Garrett watched it twice. Then he closed his office door and made 4 phone calls. The first was to the police chief, a man who owed his appointment to Garrett's endorsement. The second was to the district attorney's office. The third was to a media consultant who had managed 3 of his campaigns. The fourth was to his personal attorney. By Sunday evening, Byron Ingram had been charged with aggravated assault. The arrest happened at 6 a.m. Monday. 2 officers knocked on Byron's door. He opened it in the same clothes he wore to the park. Canvas jacket, dark glasses, the bag of gloves sitting by the door, ready for the morning session with Caleb. "Mr. Ingram, you're under arrest for the assault of Brad Sawyer." Byron didn't resist. He set the bag down on the porch, took off his glasses, held out his wrists. Mrs. Patterson was watching from her window. She saw them put handcuffs on a 74-year-old man at sunrise. She called her daughter and cried for 20 minutes. Garrett Sawyer held a press conference that afternoon. Suit pressed. American flag pin on his lapel. Brad beside him, jaw wired shut, neck brace, arm in a sling. The camera loved it. A father protecting his injured son. The image was perfect. "My son was violently attacked by an unhinged individual in a public park. Brad is 22 years old. He suffered a broken nose, a dislocated jaw, and a concussion. This was not self-defense. This was a brutal, unprovoked assault by someone who clearly has a history of violence." He paused, looked down at his notes, looked back up with practice grief. "I'm asking the DA to pursue the maximum sentence." No reporter asked about Caleb. No reporter asked about the 20 minutes of harassment that preceded the 3 punches. Garrett's media consultant had sent the press a carefully edited clip, 90 seconds long, starting the moment Byron took off his glasses. Everything before that had been cut. No Brad snatching Caleb's gloves. No "your daddy's in jail." No shove. No blood on a 10-year-old's forehead. Cable news headline: "Elderly man viciously attacks youth in park." They slowed down the uppercut. They zoomed in on Brad hitting the concrete. They showed Brad's hospital photo, swollen face, neck brace tubes. They did not show Caleb. They did not mention the blood on a 10-year-old's forehead. They did not play the first 20 minutes of the stream. If they edited the video to make Byron look like the villain, share this right now. Because the truth is about to come out. And when it does, you're going to learn that the man who just arrested Byron Ingram destroyed his life once before. 30 years ago. In a warehouse that doesn't exist anymore. And a retired journalist named Gene Whitfield is about to put the pieces together. Byron was released on bail Tuesday morning. His public defender was a young woman named Sarah Collins, 28 years old, 43 active cases. A desk that looked like a paper factory had exploded on it. She met him in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and floor wax, and she looked at him the way overworked public defenders look at everyone. With a mixture of genuine concern and the exhaustion of someone who knows the system better than she wishes she did. "The situation is serious, Mr. Ingram. The DA is pushing for felony assault. Councilman Sawyer is pressuring the judge. They want to make an example." "An example of what?" "Of you." She set down her pen. "They're saying you're dangerous. That you used trained fighting skills against an unarmed young man. That makes it aggravated." Byron sat in her office and said nothing for a long time. The fluorescent light above them hummed the way fluorescent lights always hum. That low, persistent drone that makes every room feel like a waiting room for something you don't want to arrive. "What about the boy?" he asked finally. "What about what Brad did to Caleb?" Sarah looked at her desk. Not at him. At the desk. "The Sawyer family hasn't been charged with anything. Brad's statement says he was trying to mediate a dispute when you attacked him without warning." "That's a lie." "I know. But they have a councilman, a media team, and a DA who plays golf with Garrett Sawyer every Thursday. We have a viral video that half the country now thinks shows an old man beating up a kid. He's 22. On camera with a neck brace, he looks 18. That's all that matters." A restraining order was filed Wednesday. Byron was prohibited from going within 500 feet of Brandon Park. The order was signed by Judge Mitchell Crane, the same judge who had attended Garrett Sawyer's fundraiser dinner 3 months earlier. That evening, someone threw a rock through Byron's front window. No note. No face. Just a fist-sized hole in the glass and shards scattered across Helen's rug. The Persian one she'd saved for 2 years to buy. The one she'd vacuumed every Saturday morning while humming Motown songs she'd learned from her mother. Byron swept the shards up in silence, taped a piece of cardboard over the hole, sat on the couch in the dark. He couldn't go to the park. He couldn't see Caleb. He couldn't do the only thing that had given his mornings meaning since Helen died. The canvas bag sat by the door like a promise he could no longer keep. Caleb's grandmother called that night. Her voice was thin, the kind of thin that comes from holding yourself together for someone else's sake. Mr. Ingram, I don't know what to do. Caleb won't eat. He won't talk. He just sits by the window and looks at the park. He wrapped his own hands this morning. Just sat there with his fists up, hitting the air. Byron closed his eyes. Tell him I'll be back. When? Byron didn't answer. He didn't know. The next morning, Byron woke at 7 out of habit. Got dressed. Picked up the bag. Walked to the front door. Stopped. Set the bag down. Sat on the porch. He did the same thing the next morning. And the next. And the next. On the 4th morning, he found Caleb sitting on his front steps. The boy had walked 11 blocks alone before sunrise to find him. His hands were already wrapped, badly lopsided, the tape bunching between his fingers. The way a 10-year-old wraps his own hands when his coach isn't there to do it for him. Mr. Byron. Caleb's voice cracked on the name. I don't want to stop. Byron looked at the boy. Split lips still healing. Dark circles under his eyes that no 10-year-old should have. But his fists were up. Guard position. Protecting what matters. Byron knelt down. Unwrapped the boy's hands. Rewrapped them properly. 2 loops around the wrist. 3 across the knuckles. Pull tight between each finger. Curtis Holloway's method. The same way he'd been doing it for 50 years. We're not stopping, he said. They trained on Byron's porch that morning. No oak tree. No cracked concrete ring. No canvas bag of gear spread out in the grass. Just an old man and a boy and a pair of gloves that had survived everything the world had thrown at them. They took his park. Threw a rock through his window. And a 10-year-old kid walked 11 blocks in the dark just to say don't quit. Gene Whitfield had covered boxing for 41 years. Ringside at Madison Square Garden. Press row at Atlantic City. He had watched 400 professional fights in person and written about 300 of them. He knew fighters the way a piano tuner knows pianos, not by looking at them, but by listening to the way they moved. He was 68 years old. Retired. Spent most of his days in his basement archive. Filing cabinets full of notes, photos, fight cards, and press clippings from 4 decades of watching grown men try to knock each other unconscious for money and glory. His wife had asked him to come to dinner 3 times on Wednesday evening. He didn't hear her any of those times, because he was watching the Brandon Park clip for the 14th time. It was the uppercut that haunted him. Not the power, though the power was real. It was the setup. The way the old man planted his back foot at exactly 45 degrees. The way his hips rotated before his arm moved. The way the fist traveled from the waist, not the shoulder. A kinetic chain that started in the ground and ended in a man's chin, with every joint in between contributing its piece. That wasn't a street fighter's uppercut. That wasn't something you learned from watching YouTube videos or getting into bar fights. That was a trained technique. A specific technique. One Gene had seen exactly once before in his career. Atlantic City, 1984. Middleweight title fight. A fighter they called the Ghost. Gene pulled up his archive. Found the folder in 20 minutes. A manila envelope, slightly yellowed at the edges, with a handwritten label in ink that had faded but was still legible. Ingram Byron the Ghost, 1980 to 1984. He opened it. 23 fights. 23 wins. 15 knockouts. Middleweight champion at 28. A fighting style that boxing writers called surgical and terrifying. And the most disciplined middleweight of his generation. Then nothing. The record just stopped. No retirement announcement. No farewell fight. No interview. One day Byron Ingram was the most dangerous middleweight in the division, and the next day he was gone. Like he'd never existed. Jean remembered the rumors. An underground fight. An unlicensed bout. A serious injury. But nobody had ever confirmed anything. The boxing commission had no record. The promoter was never identified. Byron Ingram simply vanished and the sport moved on the way sports always do, forward toward the next name, the next fight, the next champion. Jean looked at the viral clip again. Paused it at the moment Byron took off his dark glasses. Zoomed in. The right eye. Clouded. Unfocused. Dead. A detached retina. The kind of injury that comes from a specific type of impact. The kind that ends careers. The kind that doesn't happen in a sanctioned fight with referees and doctors and rules. Jean picked up his phone and called a source at the State Boxing Commission. I need everything you have on unlicensed bouts in 1984. Middleweight division. Anything involving an eye injury. The source called back Thursday morning. There's nothing in the official record. But I found something in the complaint files. A sealed report. An anonymous complaint was filed in March 1984 about an underground fight organized at a warehouse on Fulton Street. Jean's pen stopped moving. The complaint names a promoter. A guy named Garrett Sawyer. Jean Whitfield sat down slowly. He read the name again. Then he looked at the press conference footage from Monday. Councilman Garrett Sawyer. American flag pin, practice grief. We are a city of laws. The same man. Psychologists call it moral injury. The deep psychological wound that occurs when someone in a position of power betrays what's right. It's different from PTSD because it's not about trauma you experienced. It's about injustice you witnessed and couldn't stop. It's the weight of knowing that the system you trusted, the law, the government, the people who are supposed to protect you, is the same system being used to hurt you. Jean felt it sitting in his basement, staring at a name on a sealed complaint from 1984. Because he knew before he even confirmed it, that the man who threw that uppercut in Brandon Park had been robbed of everything. His eye, his career, his name in the record books, and the man who robbed him was now using political power to bury him again. The same man. The same pattern. 30 years apart. Jean drove to Oakfield Road on Thursday afternoon. He knocked on Byron's door. Byron opened it. Dark glasses on. Cardboard still taped over the broken window behind him. The canvas bag visible by the door. Like a soldier's rifle leaning against a wall. Mr. Ingram. My name is Jean Whitfield. I'm a retired sports journalist. I covered your title fight in Atlantic City in 1984. Byron didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stood in the doorway like a man deciding whether to close the door or step through it. I know who you are, Jean said. I know what happened to your eye. And I think I know who did it. Byron looked at him for a long time. The kind of look that measures a man. Not his words, not his credentials, but the steadiness behind his eyes. Whether he's here for a story or for the truth. There's a difference, and Byron had spent enough years being invisible to know the difference when he saw it. He stepped aside and let Jean in. They sat in the living room for 2 hours. Byron told him everything. The warehouse on Fulton Street. The heavyweight who outweighed him by 40 pounds. A man Byron had never fought before, brought in specifically for that night. The illegal elbow in the 8th round that caught him flush across the right eye. The darkness that came immediately, like someone pulling a curtain. Waking up in the hospital with one eye gone and no ringside doctor. No commission official, no lawyer, no one. The promoter who vanished overnight. I didn't know his name back then, Byron said. His voice was flat. The voice of a man who had told this story to himself so many times in the dark that it had lost all its edges. He was just a voice behind a curtain. A shadow. I never saw his face. His name was Garrett Sawyer, Jean said. Byron was quiet. He looked at the shoebox on the shelf. Helen's scarf still wrapped around the belt inside. His hands were flat on his knees. Still. The way hands get when they've stopped fighting and started listening. And his son, Byron said slowly. His son is the one in the park. Yes. Byron closed his eyes. One good, one dead. Both shut now. 30 years, he whispered. And it's the same family. Jean spent the next 48 hours building the story. He pulled county records, business filings, property deeds. In 1984, Garrett Sawyer was 29 years old and running an unlicensed boxing promotion out of a warehouse he leased under a shell company called Fulton Street Events, LLC. He organized underground bouts. No referees, no doctors, no commission oversight. Fighters were paid in cash. No medical coverage. No liability waivers. No rules except the ones the fighters agreed to between rounds, which usually amounted to don't kill each other. On March 14, 1984, Byron the Ghost Ingram fought in one of those bouts. His opponent landed an illegal elbow that detached Byron's retina. There was no ringside doctor. By the time Byron reached the hospital, the damage was permanent. Garrett Sawyer shut down the operation the next week, changed his name on the business filings, moved into real estate, then local politics, then city council. 3 terms. Chair of the Public Safety Committee. The man who kept the city safe had once run the operation that destroyed a champion's career and left him half blind. And now his son had cornered that same man in a park, had poured water on his head, had thrown his gloves in the trash, had spray-painted blind on his bench, had shoved a 10-year-old boy onto concrete until blood ran into his eye. And when the champion finally fought back, 3 punches in 5 seconds, the councilman had used every ounce of his power to bury him again. Gene Whitfield published the story on Friday morning. Front page of the Tribune's website. Headline: The Ghost of Brandon Park. How a city councilman destroyed a boxing champion. Twice. The article included everything: the sealed complaint, the warehouse address, the shell company, the medical records from 1984, side-by-side photos, Byron at 28 holding the middleweight belt, and Byron at 74 sitting on a park bench with spray paint behind him. The uppercut from the viral clip, frame by frame, matched against footage from the 1984 title fight. Identical technique. Same foot placement. Same hip rotation. Same fighter. 30 years apart. Garrett Sawyer read the article at 6 a.m. in his kitchen. His wife said his face went white. He called his attorney. The attorney didn't pick up. He called his chief of staff. The chief of staff had already resigned by email at 5:45 a.m., 12 minutes after the article went live. The article hit 40 million views by Saturday night, twice the reach of the original viral clip. #BlindChampion came back, but this time it carried a different weight. This time people understood. The old man in the park wasn't just a fighter. He was a man who had been robbed of everything by the same family that was now trying to rob him again. If the same man who destroyed Byron's career 30 years ago just tried to destroy his life again, hit subscribe right now. Because what happens next is justice. Real justice. The kind that doesn't come from a courtroom. It comes from the truth finally being louder than the lie. And Byron Ingram is about to walk back into Brandon Park. The DA's office issued a statement Saturday afternoon. In light of new evidence, the charges against Byron Ingram are under review. That was the official language. The kind of language lawyers use when they need to buy time. But underneath it, everyone in that office understood what had happened. They had charged a 74-year-old boxing champion with assault for defending a 10-year-old boy. And a journalist had just proven that the man pushing for the charges was the same man who had destroyed Byron's career 30 years earlier. By Sunday morning, the restraining order had been suspended. By Sunday afternoon, the state attorney general's office had opened a formal investigation into Councilman Garrett Sawyer. Sarah Collins called Byron at home. He was sitting on the porch. Where else would he be? Watching Helen's roses catch the late afternoon light. They were blooming late this year, but blooming all the same. Mr. Ingram, have you seen the news? No. My TV's been off since Monday. The charges are being dropped. The DA just announced it. And the AG is looking into the councilman. All of it, the underground fights, the sealed complaint, the obstruction, everything. Byron was quiet for a long time. Mr. Ingram, are you there? I'm here. How do you feel? Byron looked at the roses. At the cardboard still taped over the broken window. At the canvas bag by the door. Is it safe to go back to the park? Sarah laughed. It was the first time she'd laughed in weeks. Yes, Mr. Ingram. It's safe. The investigation moved fast. Faster than anyone expected. The state attorney general's office subpoenaed Garrett Sawyer's financial records on Monday. By Wednesday, they had the shell company filings, the warehouse lease, and bank statements showing cash payments to unlicensed fighters between 1982 and 1984. 14 fighters. No medical coverage. No insurance. No records filed with the State Boxing Commission. 3 of those fighters had suffered career-ending injuries. Byron was one of them. The other 2 had never come forward. One was working construction in Ohio with a bad knee and a worse memory. The other had died in 2003, complications from head trauma, that nobody had ever connected to a warehouse on Fulton Street. On Thursday, Garrett Sawyer was formally charged. Racketeering. Operating an unlicensed sporting event. Obstruction of justice. The last one for the 2 police complaints about Brad that had been buried. The sealed complaint from 1984 was unsealed. His name was on every page. Garrett held no press conference this time. No American flag pin. No podium. His attorney released a 2-sentence statement. Councilman Sawyer denies all charges and looks forward to his day in court. By Friday, he had resigned from the city council. Not voluntarily. The council voted unanimously to remove him. The man who had sat in the chair of public safety for 3 terms was escorted out of City Hall by the same officers who had once buried complaints on his behalf. Brad Sawyer was charged separately. Assault on a minor for shoving Caleb. Harassment. Criminal mischief for the spray paint and property damage. His TikTok account was suspended. His 200,000 followers watched his last video. The live stream from the park. Get taken down by the platform. The comments section before it disappeared was nothing but #BlindChampion and #JusticeForByron. Brad's friends were charged as accessories. The one with the ring light deleted his account. It didn't matter. The footage was already everywhere, archived, downloaded, screenshotted, embedded in news articles from New York to Los Angeles. You can't unsee what you've already seen. The boxing community found Byron before the courts did. It started with a phone call from the World Boxing Association, then the International Boxing Hall of Fame, then fighters, active and retired, who had grown up hearing whispers about the ghost, the middleweight who vanished, the champion with no farewell fight, the 23-0 record that ended not with a loss but with silence. They had all watched the Brandon Park clip. They had all read Gene Whitfield's article. And they all wanted the same thing. To acknowledge what had been stolen. The WBA issued a formal statement recognizing Byron, the Ghost Ingram's career record, 23 fights, 23 wins, 15 knockouts, and condemning the circumstances that had ended it. The statement called the underground bout a criminal act that robbed the sport of one of its finest competitors. 3 former middleweight champions recorded video messages. One of them, Carlos Rivera, who had held the belt 2 years after Byron lost his eye, said something that went viral on its own. I always wondered who the ghost was. I studied his tapes. I watched the way he moved. He was the best middleweight of his generation, and nobody gave him a farewell. Nobody gave him a ceremony. He just disappeared. Now I know why. And I wish I could have fought him. I think he would have beaten me. That clip got 12 million views in 3 days. Byron Ingram walked back into Brandon Park on a Tuesday morning in November. 7 a.m. sharp. Canvas bag over his shoulder. New dark glasses, paid for by a boxing fan in Detroit who had mailed them with a handwritten note. For the ghost. Welcome back. The park was quiet. The oak tree had dropped most of its leaves. The cracked concrete still looked like a ring if you squinted. The basketball courts were empty. The chain-link fence still rattled when the wind came off the street. Everything was the same. And everything was different. Caleb was already there. Sitting on the bench under the oak tree. Hands wrapped. Fists up. Waiting. Byron set the bag down. Looked at the bench. The spray paint was gone. Someone had sanded it clean and repainted it. The same forest green it had been before Brad's graffiti. And a small brass plaque had been screwed into the backrest, right where your shoulder blades would rest if you sat back. It read, "This bench belongs to Byron Ingram and everyone he teaches." He didn't know who put it there. He never found out. He suspected Mrs. Patterson, but when he asked her, she just smiled and said, "Some things don't need names attached to them, Byron." "Mr. Byron." Caleb was smiling. The stutter was still there, it would always be there, in some form, but the smile was bigger than the stutter now. It had been growing for months, morning by morning, jab by jab, until it was the biggest thing about him. "You ready?" Byron asked. "Yes, sir." "Show me your jab." Caleb threw it. Snap. Straight. Pull back. Clean. Again. Snap. Cleaner. The morning light came through the bare oak branches and landed on the cracked concrete like a spotlight. The other kids arrived one by one. Deshawn first. Then Kesha. Her father brought her back with an apology that Byron accepted with a handshake and a nod. Then new faces. Kids Byron had never seen before. Some came with their parents. Some came alone. One boy walked 3 miles from the east side because he'd seen the video and wanted to learn how to stand like that. Byron taught them all the same way. One thing at a time. Plant your feet. Hands up. Protect what matters. Research from Harvard Medical School shows something that explains what happened to Byron that morning, and what would happen to him every morning from that point forward. When a person returns to a place where they experience trauma after achieving justice, their brain undergoes what neuroscientists call memory reconsolidation. The brain literally rewrites the emotional memory of that place. Brandon Park had been a site of humiliation for Byron. The water bottle. The gloves in the trash. The spray paint. The arrest at sunrise. His brain had encoded all of it, not as explicit memories he could describe in words, but as emotional markers that said this place is where you were made small. But walking back in with his head held high, with Caleb waiting for him, with a brass plaque on the bench with 15 kids lining up to learn, his brain was rewriting the story. The park wasn't where he'd been broken anymore. It was where he'd been put back together. Every morning from that point on, Byron would walk into Brandon Park and his brain would choose the new memory over the old one. Not because the old one was gone, memories don't work that way, but because the new one was stronger, louder, more alive. The ghost wasn't haunting the park. He was healing it. The neighbors came back first. Mrs. Patterson brought a casserole and an apology. She stood on Byron's porch with tears running down her face and said, "I should have called. I should have done something." Byron took the casserole. "You're here now. That counts." Deshawn's mother brought him back to the group. So did Kesha's father. Within a week, Byron had 9 kids showing up every morning. Then 12. Then 15. Parents started staying to watch. Some of them brought chairs. One brought a folding table with water bottles and orange slices. Like it was a real gym with a real corner, and a real coach who deserved real support. Byron didn't correct them. He just kept teaching. The city council, now missing one member, passed a resolution the following month. Brandon Park would receive funding for a permanent community boxing program. New equipment. A covered training area near the oak tree. Licensed coaches. Free for all kids under 16. They asked Byron what to name it. He didn't hesitate. The Helen Ingram boxing program. He paused. Looked down at his hands. The scarred knuckles, the fingers that didn't quite straighten, the hands that had won 23 fights and wrapped 1,000 jabs and held his wife's hand while she died. After my wife. She's the reason I kept my hands down for 30 years. He looked up. And she's the reason I finally put them back up. If you've ever been told that your best days are behind you, type "not done yet" in the comments. Because Byron Ingram was 74 years old when the world remembered his name. And he wasn't done. Not even close. Because there's still one more morning to tell you about. The morning Caleb stepped into a real ring for the first time. And what Byron saw in that boy's eyes, standing across from an opponent, fists up, feet planted, was the same thing Curtis Holloway had seen in his eyes 50 years ago. The ghost of a fighter who hadn't been born yet. The Helen Ingram boxing program launched officially in December. The city provided heavy bags, speed bags, jump ropes, and a covered pavilion next to the oak tree. A simple wooden structure with a tin roof that kept the rain off but let the morning light through. 2 licensed coaches volunteered. Both former Golden Gloves competitors who had followed the story and called the parks department asking how they could help. Byron wasn't technically a coach on paper. He didn't have the certification. He hadn't taken the course. He didn't have a laminated card with his name on it that said he was qualified to teach children how to fight. But every morning he was there. And every morning the Real coaches stepped back and let him work. Nobody questioned it. Nobody needed to. You don't ask a man who went 23-0 to show you his credentials. The program grew faster than anyone predicted. By January there were 20 kids. By February 35. They came from all over the neighborhood, and some from outside it. A girl from the west side who took 2 buses because her mother said, "If that man can teach my daughter to stand up for herself, I'll drive her to the moon." A boy who had been in 3 fights at school, and whose principal suggested the program as an alternative to suspension. A quiet kid who never said a word during training but showed up every single morning, and left with his fists wrapped tighter than anyone else's. Byron taught them all the same way. One thing at a time. Left foot forward. Right foot back. Hands up. Protect what matters. He never raised his voice. Never pushed too hard. When a kid got frustrated and threw their gloves, and they did because kids get frustrated because the world gives them reasons to, Byron picked the gloves up, set them on the bench and said the same thing he'd said to Caleb 3 months earlier. "They'll be here tomorrow." They always came back. Jean Whitfield visited one more time. He brought a photographer, a young woman named Priya who had been following the story for the Tribune and had asked Jean if she could come along. Jean said yes because he recognized the look in her eyes. The same look he'd had 41 years ago when he first walked into a boxing gym, and understood that what he was watching wasn't violence. It was a language. A conversation between 2 people using their bodies instead of words. They arrived at 8 a.m. The pavilion was already full. 35 kids spread across the cracked concrete. Some shadowboxing, some working the heavy bags, some just standing in their stance, feet planted, hands up, breathing in rhythm. Byron was in the middle of it all, kneeling beside a new kid, maybe 8 years old, gloves too big, eyes too wide, wrapping his hands for the first time. 2 loops around the wrist. 3 across the knuckles. Pull tight between each finger. Priya raised her camera. She took one shot. That one shot became the most shared image in the Tribune's history. Byron Ingram, 74 years old, kneeling on cracked concrete, wrapping an 8-year-old boy's hands. One good eye looking down at the tape. One dead eye facing the camera. Behind them 35 kids in a line, fists up, guard position, learning to protect what matters. The morning light came through the pavilion roof and landed on Byron's face the way light lands on things that have survived. Jean wrote the headline himself. 3 words. The ghost found his way home. 6 months after the program launched, Caleb entered his first amateur boxing match. A youth exhibition at the Oakfield Community Center. Nothing fancy, folding chairs for the audience, a ring that was really just a raised platform with ropes. A referee who coached high school wrestling during the week and did this on Saturdays because he believed kids needed somewhere to put their energy that wasn't the street. Caleb was 10 years old, 42 pounds lighter than his opponent, and so nervous his hands were shaking in the locker room. Byron wrapped them. 2 loops around the wrist. 3 across the knuckles. Pull tight between each finger. The same way Curtis Holloway had wrapped his hands in 1974. The same way he'd wrapped Caleb's hands every morning for 9 months. A ritual passed down like a prayer. From one pair of hands to another across 50 years, through a basement gym in Philadelphia, through a park bench under an oak tree, into a locker room that smelled like sweat and floor wax and possibility. "You scared?" Byron asked. Caleb nodded. His lip trembled the way it used to. The stutter was right there, sitting behind his teeth, waiting. "Good," Byron said. "Scared means you care. Now plant your feet." Caleb looked at him. The boy who had watched from behind a water fountain. The boy who had stood closer on the second day. The boy who had put his hands out and let a stranger wrap them. The boy who had walked 11 blocks before sunrise to say, "I don't want to stop." He stood up. Left foot forward. Right foot back. Hands up. He walked into the ring. The first round was messy. Caleb's opponent was bigger, stronger, and came out swinging the way bigger, stronger kids do, wild hooks, looping overhands, all power and no precision. Caleb spent most of the round moving, slipping, keeping his guard up, taking a few shots on the arms that he'd felt 100 times on the heavy bag. Between rounds, Byron knelt in his corner. Didn't say much. Just 3 things he's throwing wide. Step inside his reach. Your jab is faster than his hands. Use it. Plant your feet. You know what to do. Caleb nodded. Spit into the bucket. Stood up. The bell rang for round 2. Caleb came out different. Not angry. Not desperate. Just focused. The way Byron had taught him, the kind of focus that doesn't need emotion to fuel it. The kind that comes from 10,000 repetitions of the same movement until your body does it before your brain has time to doubt it. He threw the jab. Snap. Straight. His opponent's head tilted back. Again. Snap. The bigger boy's guard opened for a fraction of a second. The opening that Byron had been teaching Caleb to see for months. The opening that exists in every fighter who throws too wide and forgets to bring his hands back. Caleb saw it. He planted his back foot at exactly 45 degrees. Rotated his hips. Drove his right cross from the waist. Not the shoulder, the waist, straight down the center, the way Byron had shown him on the cracked concrete under the oak tree. The same way Curtis Holloway had shown Byron in that basement gym half a century ago. The cross landed clean. To the body. Right below the sternum. The bigger boy folded. Dropped to one knee. The referee started counting. He didn't get up. The crowd stood. Caleb's grandmother screamed so loud the referee turned around to see what was happening. Deshaun jumped over the ring rope. Kesha was crying and laughing at the same time. Which is what happens when you watch someone you love do something you never thought they could. Caleb looked across the ring at Byron. Byron nodded once. That was enough. In 1962, a boxer named Dick Tiger won the Middleweight Championship of the world. He was 32 years old, a Nigerian immigrant fighting in America, a country that didn't always want him but couldn't deny what he could do with his hands. He'd been counted out, dismissed, and underestimated his entire career. Promoters said he was too old. Writers said he was past his prime. The betting lines favored his opponent by 3-1. He won the title with a right hand that trainers still study today. The same kinetic chain foot, hip, shoulder, fist that Byron Ingram threw in Brandon Park. That Caleb threw in the Oakfield Community Center. That Curtis Holloway had thrown in a basement gym in Philadelphia before any of them were born. Dick Tiger proved something that Byron Ingram proved 40 years later on a cracked concrete court. And that Caleb proved on a raised platform with folding chairs for an audience. A fighter's hands don't forget. And a man's dignity doesn't have an expiration date. Outside the community center, Helen's roses were blooming early this year. Byron noticed them on the walk home. The November air was cold, but the roses had pushed through anyway. Deep red, stubborn, refusing to wait for the calendar to tell them when it was time. He stopped, touched one of the petals. It was soft, alive. The way Helen's hand had felt the last time he held it in that hospital room. Before the machine started beeping and the nurses came in and the world went quiet in a way it had never been quiet before. He smiled. Then he kept walking. Canvas bag over his shoulder. Dark glasses on. One good eye watching the sidewalk ahead of him. One dead eye facing a world that had tried to erase him twice and failed both times. He walked past the coffee shop that used to be a corner store. Past the yoga studio that used to be a barber shop. Past Mrs. Patterson's window, where she waved at him the way she always did now. Not from behind the curtain, but with the window open like she'd finally decided that watching wasn't the same as showing up. He walked home. Set the bag by the door. Sat on the porch. The cardboard was gone from the window. Someone, he suspected Deshaun's mother, but she never confirmed it, had replaced the glass while he was at the community center. Clean glass. No cracks. No memory of the rock. Byron sat on the porch and watched the neighborhood settle into evening around him. Streetlights coming on. Kids heading home from the park. The distant sound of someone's television through an open window. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary evening. The kind he used to take for granted before he understood how rare a peaceful evening actually is. Plant your feet. Hands up. Protect what matters. That's what Byron Ingram taught every morning under an oak tree in Brandon Park. Not just to Caleb. Not just to the 35 kids in the Helen Ingram boxing program. To everyone who watched that video and saw something in a 74-year-old man with one good eye and a canvas bag full of old gloves. He taught them that strength isn't about fighting. It's about knowing when to fight and when to protect. When to keep your hands down because someone you love asked you to. And when to put them back up because someone you love needs you to. He taught them that patience isn't weakness. It's a choice. And sometimes the most patient people in the world are the ones carrying the heaviest things. A dead brother's memory, a wife's promise, a career that was stolen, a community that looked away. He taught them that ghosts don't always haunt. Sometimes they teach. Sometimes they wrap a child's hands and say they'll be here tomorrow, and mean it with every scar on their knuckles. And he taught them that you're never too old, never too broken, never too invisible to matter. Who's the person in your life who kept showing up for you when nobody else did? The person who wrapped your hands when you were shaking? Who told you, they'll be here tomorrow when you wanted to quit? Drop their name in the comments. Tell me their story. I read every single one. If this story hit you somewhere real, if it reminded you of someone who believed in you, or someone you should have believed in more, hit that like button. Share this with someone who's been counted out. Someone who's been told they're too old, too quiet, too broken to fight back. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Because the next Byron is already out there. Teaching a kid on a cracked concrete court somewhere. Wrapping small hands with old tape, waiting for the world to notice. Plant your feet. Hands up. Protect what matters. And never let anyone tell you that your best days are behind you.